I'll introduce you to Emeka Anyanwu, who became CEO of Lincoln Electrical Systems, the public utility service serving Lincoln, Nebraska, and surrounding communities in January 2024. Prior to LES, he served as Energy, Innovation, and Resources Officer at Seattle City Light, one of the nation's largest community-owned, not-for-profit utilities. In that role, he was responsible for leading strategic functions that included utility technology, information security, electrification, grid modernization, and current and future power resource strategy. Emeka has been an active participant and contributor in industry discussions throughout his career. His recent awards include the Smart Electric Power Alliance's Individual 2021 Power Player of the Year and the Energy Thought Summit's 2023 Thought Leader of the Year.
Oh, thank you, Jackson. I appreciate that. I'm trying not to be tethered to the podium here. But yeah, thank you all for having me. It's exciting to see so many bright young faces. Please, as Jackson said, please continue to eat, continue to enjoy your lunch. I'm going to talk a little bit about our utility and what we think it's going to take to build the future of energy. Obviously, I'm excited to be here in front of so many great climate-minded young people because I'm sure you all are very familiar with the role that energy plays and the choices we make around energy will play in what our climate future is going to be. And really, in this sense, the future is really the present, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So I won't belabor the introduction. You heard a little bit about it. I will just say, I've been in the utility business for over 22 years, and I will tell you that as someone who is also very climate-minded myself, I find no better place to do the work than to be in the business that I'm in, because I think, for those of us who are concerned about the future of our climate, part of what it's going to take is that we all be willing to do the work to turn things around. So, really briefly about LES. So LES is your local public power organization, and as I came, of course, from Seattle, which is also one of the largest, but LES is one of the top, one of the largest public power utilities as well. And really, for the large public power utilities, the thing that tends to be unique about us is that we are public utilities that are not investor-owned, so we don't have shareholders. Really, the people who own the utility is you all, is the community, is our customers. And having those in urban areas is typically where you find the larger ones, and it's a pretty unique structure. So very reliable. We have our portfolio split in thirds, natural gas, coal, and renewables, and we'll talk about sort of the work we're doing on that. That number about employees is actually a little bit outdated. We're actually now closer to about 560 employees, but we serve the population of Lincoln, which is about 300,000 people. So to speak a little bit more about public power, the state of Nebraska is the only state in the United States that is 100% public power. That means there are no utilities in our state that are owned by investors, that have shares, that are publicly traded. They are all community-owned utilities. And so when you think about the role, again, that energy will play and our energy choices will play in the future, you can think about the fact that in Nebraska we have power that is owned by communities, and so the community, that's all of us, we get to make choices about how our power is sourced and how it's delivered. We are also one of the most reliable states for power. That means, our power stays on more than anybody else's, and we are also one of the most affordable states, which means that we are among the lowest cost in the country. And so we have the ability to do that in part because we partner with the community to deliver our services. So locally owned, very reliable, and we prioritize our customers. So speaking of electrification, just to kind of give everybody a sense of what that is the trend that we have going right now where many people, customers, communities are making the choice to use electricity for most of their energy needs. And so that is certainly a transition that's underway. You may have heard a little bit about it. It is in part going to help us with the transition away from fossil fuels. And really, part of what that means is that utilities like ours are thinking about the ways in which electricity will be used and how to make sure that we are there to serve that need, right? So when you think about people using heat pumps to heat and cool their homes, you think about people driving electric vehicles, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, right? Those are parts of that trend of electrification. From a sustainability perspective, that's also something that we are very focused on as a utility. You know, part of sustainability is certainly the moving away from carbon emissions and really thinking about what it's going to take to continue to provide the energy that we need over the long term. You know, how do we sustain the path that we are on as a community and as a society as it relates to energy, and making sure that we can continue to provide and what is really becoming a society and lifestyles that demand more and more energy as we go along. So I have a question here, and if you want to pull out your phones, you can play along here. You saw this earlier, but maybe you'll be able to sort of really quickly pick out. So if you scan the QR code, you can get in and do the answer here. So I'll give you all a second to do that. Okay. So if you guessed 34%, you got it right, obviously. Like as I said earlier, it's a third of our portfolio. And that is something that has taken quite a bit of work for the utility to get to. So traditionally, of course, the generation mix was much heavier in fossil fuels. And so that's been a very deliberate effort to increase the portion of the portfolio that is renewable, and we're continuing to do that work. So as I said, our current portfolio includes multiple different kinds of energy. We have coal, we have some hydro that comes from the federal government, so hydroelectric energy that is generated by federal dams. We have natural gas, we have wind, which is really the bulk of our renewable portfolio, as well as some landfill gas and a little bit of solar. And so the picture that you see there is a community solar farm that LES operates on behalf of the community, and that's part of how we are getting into solar power as part of our portfolio. And as I said, the transition that we are making is very much deliberate. So in the last almost 15 years, really since 2010, there's been a significant reduction in our carbon production, right? Again, that is part of LES's push to decarbonize, to move away from fossil fuels, to reduce the carbon intensity of the energy that we use here in Lincoln. And so, you know, as you can imagine, right, you know, these things are not really, they're not very simple, and they're not immediate. It takes time to make a transition. And so you can see there have been ups and downs, but certainly our trajectory, our direction is very much moving away from fossil fuels. And we certainly hope to ultimately get to, you're right, we have a target to get to a decarbonized, a net zero portfolio by 2040, and that's what you see with the line there. So to speak a little bit more about that, our net zero goal, getting to net zero carbon emissions from our generation portfolio by 2040, so just a little over 15 years from now, is one of the most aggressive goals in the country. because it is really taking, there are a couple different pieces of this. Obviously, there is sort of moving away from the existing fossil fire generation that we have, but also it's also doing that in a world in which we are using more and more energy, right? So the demand is increasing even as we're trying to move away from those sources of energy, and so it's pretty aggressive. It's pretty ambitious, but again, as you all know, right, as climate-minded young people, there's urgency, right, for us to really meet the climate crisis where it is. And so the other thing that I think is important to point out is this aligns, and I believe you all heard from the city's sustainability director this morning, Kim Morrow, and we work really closely with her and the city. Our decarbonization goal is a big part of the city's climate action plan, right? And again, those are the kinds of things that are possible with a public power utility that is directly tied to the citizens and the customers here in Lincoln. So what else does it take? Really, there are a whole lot of different kinds of energy that it will take for us to really move. So when you think about solar, there are multiple different ways that gets done, right? So net metering is a concept where, for people who have solar panels, say on their roofs or on their property in some other ways, you essentially, they are able to use that energy instead of the energy from the grid, and it offsets their usage. So that then what we are metering, what we are measuring in terms of what they pay for in electricity is just what doesn't get generated by the solar panels. So that can be pretty cool. Community solar is basically a way for the community to have shared ownership of solar farm assets, right? And so people essentially buy subscriptions to the large solar farm, as you can see, which we have one on the north side of the city. And in that way, they help to support that asset being in place, and they can contribute to making the choice to use renewable energy. We have solar panels artfully arranged in the pattern of our logo on top of our new operations center, which is down on about 94th and Rokeby. And that is, again, another way that we are offsetting our own usage with renewable energy. So, really creating opportunities through renewable generation for us to start using less fossil-intensive energy is really a big part of what it will take. Something else, the Sustainable Energy Program. So this is a program that we have that is really focused on energy efficiency. You heard me say that we are now in a much more energy-intensive society, right? We're in a society in which we use more and more energy. Part of the way that we manage how much of that energy we use is try to figure out how to be more efficient, how to essentially do more with less, right? And so the Sustainable Energy Program has done things to help people be more effective with their use of energy. More efficient lighting that uses less energy is something that the Sustainable Energy Program is really focused on over the course of the last couple of decades, but also thinking about more energy efficient heating and cooling, right? And so the transition away from traditional HVAC, heating, ventilation, and cooling to heat pump technology, which uses really the heating and cooling of the air around us to sort of heat and cool the home, is also part of how you be more efficient, because that technology uses a lot less energy than the traditional sort of coolant circulating systems. Peak rewards is another thing. Peak rewards is a sort of a form of what we call demand response. And what that is basically we are able to recognize when people are using, when the system is using a lot of energy, and we're able to sort of manage that by being able to control various uses in homes and in businesses. So by raising or lowering the temperature in a facility or in a building by a couple of degrees, we can essentially reduce that usage. And if you do that for a whole lot of homes or a whole lot of businesses, you reduce the overall usage, which is a way to then prevent the need to build more generation or to acquire more carbon emitting generation. So that is something, that ability to flexibly control demand is going to be a big part of how we meet the future needs. So here's something that's really, really important and near and dear to my heart. You know, the way I think about the work that we have to do. One of the things that's really true about this transition is going to be that this will happen, right, once in all of our lifetimes, right? So there really is a one-time opportunity as we make this transition to figure out how we make sure that this transition doesn't ultimately have negative impacts, particularly on people who are most vulnerable and most unable to bear those negative impacts, right? So when you hear, and you know, if you spend time around this stuff, you will hear sort of the term equity in the transition, or energy equity, or energy justice, or environmental justice, all of those terms, right? They are all about how do you make sure the transition is the most equitable, the fairest, the most thoughtful about how we protect the most vulnerable in our society from the impacts of the transition. And in so doing, in fact, actually looking for opportunities to reverse perhaps past inequities. So, and this kind of thinking really is very consistent with the public power sort of way of thinking, the public power ethos, right? Because again, we are really all about our communities. We are really all about making sure that everybody has the same access to the community-owned asset that is the utility. It's important also to remember, right? Part of what's true about equity is not equality. And so it means meeting people where they are, right? People who need the most get the most assistance, and vice versa. And that requires all of us. That requires all of us to recognize, right, that that's part of that shared responsibility we have when we make decisions for our public power utility, is that we are all working together to protect the most vulnerable people in our society, the people who need the most, the people who have the least resources, people who have the least access, or who have historically had the least input into some of these kinds of decisions. And so what you see on the screen is some of the ways that LES has worked to make sure that we have access to energy efficiency programs for all. And that's one way to ensure that there is an equitable transition, right? So that the people who are able to be more efficient with their usage are across the spectrum of income. And so we have these income qualifying energy efficiency incentives. We have a partnership with Community Action of Lincoln, and we also provide bill assistance for our low-income customers. So people who have less ability to afford their energy usage, we have programs to help them pay for those bills. Creating opportunity for affordable housing, right? So multifamily units, thinking about giving people access to heat pump technology. Heat pump technology certainly is more efficient. It also is, at this point in time, more expensive, right? But you want people to have access to that, not only because it allows them to use less and help us have to use less, have less carbon emissions. It also allows people to drive down the cost of their own bill as well, right? So that's an important part of what happens here. So there are two different parts of that. It's both reducing emissions as well as helping the people with less resources be able to afford their energy usage. So the other thing that's true is that while LES is a large public utility, as you saw on the slide, it's the 23rd largest, we're still a relatively small utility in the grand scheme of things, right? There are utilities that are easily 5-10 times our size, right? And so because of that scale, right, some of those organizations have a lot more resources than we do to invest in research and development. But that doesn't mean that we don't have opportunities, right? So there is research that LES participates in. We did a study a few years ago on EVs, and it was all about trying to figure out how customers in our service territory, Lincoln and the surrounding communities that we serve use their EVs? How often do they charge? How far are they driving? Right? How many people have electric vehicles? And how quickly is that number growing? That kind of research is part of how we decide, how we figure out what do we need to plan for, right? What do we need to put in place? Not just in terms of energy, but even questions about how and where people will charge their electric vehicles, right? And what is the role of the utility in making sure that people have access to charging who want to use electric vehicles? I'm sure you all know this, but it's worth pointing out the move away from internal combustion engines, right? Fossil fuel burning vehicles. That's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The automotive industry has chosen what it's going to do, right? If you look across the board, Toyota, GM, Ford, all of them, they all have plans in various stages of execution, but every single one of them has a date certain in which they expect to stop making vehicles that burn gasoline. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Utilities like LES have a part to play in making sure that as we get to the point in time where all of our community only has access to vehicles that don't burn gasoline, need vehicles that that use electricity, that we have put the infrastructure in place. We've put the facilities in place to make sure that people have access to the energy they will need to move around. And so that's a really important part of what we research and what we're looking for. We're also, EPRI, or what we call the Electric Power Research Institute, that's sort of an international partnership of utilities and companies that make energy equipment that we use in the energy industry, of researchers, certainly academic researchers and otherwise, that come together to figure out where are the places where we do need to do research to understand what the future of that energy is going to be. One of those initiatives is called the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, which is one that LES sponsors and is supportive of, and we're partnered with, again, all of those kinds of agencies. And that one is really focused on trying to find low carbon ways of generating electricity, right? So when I talk about the need for us to figure out how we're going to transition our generation fleet, right, it's from the results of research like the LCRI initiative. And then the other thing that we have to do is we have to walk the talk, right? And so we have to think as a utility in the ways in which we do our work, in the ways in which we run the utility operation. How are we reducing our contribution to emissions in the atmosphere? And so one of those things is getting our vehicles, right, our fleet vehicles that our employees used to get around, that our employees used to go out and do work, that our employees used to go out and serve customers, to be less sort of carbon intensive, right? And so 80% of our car fleet is 80% of our fleet is hybrid or plug-in hybrid or all electric, right? So on some level, they are low emission vehicles, right? And that's part of how we contribute to that. And that continues, there are some limitations there in terms of as the vehicles become available, right? So for some of our heavier construction vehicles, as an example, there is still work going on to build vehicles that can be electric, but that can also fulfill those needs. Right now, those don't necessarily exist the way that we would like. But that's part of what it takes. So something else that is kind of worth pointing out. We're interested in conversations with our customers, right? And so we have what's called the Educational Interactive Tiny House, EDITH, if you follow the acronym. And that's that picture up there, if you can see my pointer, right? And what that is it's a tiny house, basically on a trailer that we can drive from place to place to help teach people about energy efficiency, teach people about electric safety, and have other conversations with the community. But that's what's important, right? Like as a public power utility, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to our community, right? And that includes you all. We want to hear what you have to say and what you think, right? It's a big part of why I'm here today. We do workshops. We invite people in. So what you see down here in the middle, in the bottom middle, is an integrated resource planning workshop, When we make decisions, as we do our planning work around what kind of generation plants we're going to build or have, we want to talk to our community again. We want to hear what you all have to say about the choices we think are available, right? In any kind of planning, right? If you plan for, you're planning a trip, or you're planning a party, or you're planning anything else, right? You have different options, right? You have to figure out, what am I going to choose to do? We want to involve our community in those choices, right? And say, hey, these are the things that we could do. What is it that we want to do? And we try to make those agreements. So, and so that is something that we do every 5 years. The next one is scheduled in 2027. But we have the ride and drive events that we do. That's about giving people access to and information about what it takes to own electric vehicles and what it's like to drive electric vehicles. We do tours, right? So you see a plant tour on the bottom of the screen there, bottom corner of the screen there too. So we really want to be able to talk to our community about all of the things that we're doing. So let's talk a little bit about the net zero goal. As I said, one of the most ambitious goals in the country. What is it going to take? Well, it's going to take a whole lot of things, some of which are things we don't necessarily even know right now, right? That piece, the final 200 megawatts, right? So the last, when this goal was put in place, which was a little over almost 4 years ago now, 2020, what we didn't know exactly is, we have some ideas about how we're going to move forward. We certainly know that we're going to work to remove coal from our portfolio, right? So if you think about the size of that challenge, that's this big chunk right here, right? And so you take that big chunk out right here. That's part of what contributes to the gap here, right? That piece is solar, as you can see from the bottom, right? Increasing our wind penetration. And so it really becomes, what are the things, where the technology is going to come from, right? And we don't necessarily know what that is, right? So the planning work continues, right? What we do know is that we will continue to acquire the resources, the renewable resources and other resources that it'll take. But part of this really is, we have to be able to do this and still keep the system reliable. And it isn't just because, reliability obviously is what we do as an electric utility. But it's important to remember, when I talk about equity and I talk about justice, people with less resources have less ability to withstand interruptions to their energy, right? So when there are power outages, people of lower incomes, people with less resources, have a harder time, right? They have less options. They have less things that they can do to get by during a power outage. So it's really, really important, if we care about equity in the transition, if we care about environmental justice, we care about energy justice, it's really important that we stay reliable through the transition. So this is kind of a cool graphic, because it's a little bit of a mock-up, right, of Lincoln's energy, and it's obviously sort of it's an artist's rendition really of Lincoln. So you see the arena and some other things that will sort of give you the sense of where you are in space and time, right? But all of the different pieces, that some of which most of which I've talked about, right? The sustainable energy program, adding solar resources. You can see, part of what we envision is certainly a variety of different kinds of solar, both solar on rooftops and maybe ground-mounted solar, community solar, like I talked about earlier. All of those things become part of it. You think about battery storage. We have a pilot. In fact, we just signed a contract to bring in a 5-megawatt battery that's going to be located downtown, and that's going to be part of serving a microgrid. And a microgrid is basically a small version of the utility system, right, that is able essentially to keep the power on even if we had some kind of a major event, right? We had a transmission line go down, there was some kind of a tornado, and we lost service from one of our generating plants. It's able to sort of keep a lot of the critical stuff, which is really important to all of us, right? The critical stuff that is downtown, the the government buildings and the first responders and all of the folks that sort of provide the services that we all rely on, that being able to keep that core of the city powered up, even in the event of something like bad like that happening, is really important. And so using battery storage in that way is something that will really not only give us that option downtown, but also will teach us a lot about what it's like to own and operate storage resources like that battery. And so as we expand potentially our usage of those things, we will really understand how they operate. By the way, really quickly, kind of show of hands, how many people were aware of the wind turbines, the Lincoln wind turbines on the northeast side of town? And how many people know that we brought those down recently? Okay, great. So the reason I mentioned that is not necessarily because, well, it is in part because we brought those down. But here's what's important about that. As I've tried to share the message across the community, one of the things I want everybody to remember whenever you think about those, LES's ability to decommission those wind turbines is something to be celebrated. And why is that? Because those things did exactly what they were supposed to do. Much like the battery that I'm talking about, right? They were put in at a time before LES had any wind in its portfolio. LES learned all the things it needed to learn about wind. And you heard me say, in about 15 years, LES then all of a sudden had a whole lot of wind in our portfolio. So those kinds of things are worth celebrating. We have expansion within the microgrid. We're thinking about time of use rates, which is, again, a way for people to manage their energy usage. So lots of things are developing around this. I won't sort of bore you all with those specific terms, but what I will say is this. All of the things that we're talking about, many of them are in various stages of development even now. So really, in many ways, I like to say the future is now. And a lot of this is stuff that we can look at in advance of when they become available, right? So some of the work around advanced nuclear, some of the work around artificial intelligence and the ways that will allow us to manage the energy system are coming around. But all of it is pointed toward a reality that is recognizing that the way things are today is not the way they will be, right? And so we have to develop new technologies and new tools to be able to manage that. And so some of these trends are really exciting things that we all would do well to keep an eye on. So kind of to wrap things up here, what can you do, right? And this is, to me, probably the most exciting part of this presentation. It's all up to you, right? There are so many of the things that I talked about in there that those solutions, the solutions to those challenges, the solutions to those choices, won't be made, won't be found, won't be discovered by people like me. Won't be planned, won't be, I'm an electrical engineer by, that's what I went to college for. And I won't get to engineer a lot of what I talked about today. It's going to be people like you, probably somebody in this room. So the future is up to you, and we want you to get involved. Our board meetings, they happen on the third Friday of every month. They're open to the public. Come by sometime. Listen in and see what's being talked about. Not just me that gets Yes, so we don't just have to talk to Mr. Winston here. But we want to see you. We want to talk to you, as I said earlier. It's really important to us to hear what you have. And particularly for all of you young folks in the room, don't ever let anybody tell you you're too young to be involved. Okay? That's bunk. That's just not true. Get involved. The other thing you can do, consider a career in energy, right? I'm sure you guys get tired of hearing this, but it's true. Once upon a time, I was like you, sitting in a room like this, listening to somebody talk about, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to study? What kind of work do you want to do? There are all kinds of things in our business. Everything from thinking about the environment and our environmental impact to, engineering work like me, how to plan and design power lines, how to plan and operate generation equipment, how to, manage the accounts and the finances of a utility, right? The bills and meeting with customers. There are all kinds of things. Basically, if you can think of work that you are excited about doing, there's probably a way for you to apply that within the utility business. So think about that. Keep your eye out for internship opportunities, for co-op opportunities. And as I said, come by the board meetings. Come by if you hear about a public meeting for LES, come by. Last night we had a public meeting about our budget and rates. Listen into that stuff. Hear about that stuff. Check our website. Read up on those things. And if you have questions, reach out. We love nothing more. I love nothing more. It is so exciting when Ken asked me to come speak today. I was so excited to do it, right? Because there's nothing I love more than being able to talk to our customers. And it's a particular treat to talk to young people. Because you guys, as I said, the future is up to you. It's all in your hands. And if there's anything I can ever do to make you excited about, if you're excited about the climate, you should be excited about energy. And if there's anything I can ever do to excite you about doing the work that it's going to take for us to move away from fossil fuels, I would love to be able to do it. Show of hands. This is going to be kind of an easy one, hopefully. Who knows who Bill Gates is? Great. So you can put your hands down. So in 2017, Bill Gates had a conversation with Nebraska's own oracle, Mr. Buffett, Warren Buffett. And Warren asked Bill during that conversation if he had his, so remember who Bill Gates is, right? You all know who he is, right? Founder of Microsoft, one of the, wealthiest men in the world, one of the most, considered certainly one of the smartest people who's ever lived, right? And Warren asked Bill, what would he do if he had his career to start over? Where would he go? Now, it's true. He actually said in that conversation, he probably would maybe do what he did, which is be in computers and in the computer business. But the second thing he said is he would be in energy. He was really interested in what it might take to create cheap, reliable, and environmentally responsible energy. So think about that. If it's good enough for Bill, it's good enough for any of us, right? So with that, I don't know if do we have time for any questions, or I see hands already.
Okay, we'll do
A couple quick, okay. Right here up in front.
if we have them do it on the mic.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically about solar energy and solar panels, I noticed that we don't have a lot of solar panels, so I asked my dad, why is that? And he said, in his opinion, he thought the answer was hail, the weather. So I was wondering if that is, truly a big impact on why a lot of people don't have solar panels on their roofs. And if so, how are you going to get people on board with the idea of, more use of solar panels?
What a great question. I don't know specifically the answer to that, so I'm gonna do my best here. But I certainly am not aware. As I said, I've been doing this for a little while, and I'm certainly not aware of any particular vulnerability that solar panels have to hail or to the weather. Now, it certainly is true, like anything else. Hail, weather can impact, can damage, that piece of equipment. But it's also true that that can happen to our other facilities too, right? We lost transmission structures during the tornado back in the spring, right? We have all kinds of equipment that can be damaged by weather. It doesn't stop us from putting that equipment in place. We do the best we can to make sure that we can protect that equipment. I think what's also really important to remember is part of what we are doing here is not just about the environment and climate. It's also about resiliency. So having lots of different options helps make us less vulnerable to those kinds of weather impacts. Does that help? Yeah. All right. One in the back. Oh, there's one over here. Okay.
Oh,
got a question right here. Wait. She's got the mic.
Sorry.
Stay to your side of the room.
When net zero becomes possible, do you think there'll be people who will want to bring back non-sustainable energy, and if so, why do you think would want to do that?
I sure hope not. I think that we hope that part of what we will be able to demonstrate is that it is possible to move away from fossil fuels, to reduce our emissions, and keep things affordable. I think what's true, what we have seen already, right, is that the climate is already changing, has already changed. I think it's something that we should all be concerned about. You think about the 6 million people in the southeast part of the country who have been impacted by Hurricane Helene, right? That kind of, we've been saying in our business, those kinds of extreme weather used to be, a once in a generation thing. We have one once every other year now, right? So I sure hope that nobody wants us to continue down that path, and that's not what motivates anybody to want to go back to emit carbon emitting resources. Does that help? All right.
I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but if you have questions, you can send them to your teacher, and we can send them to
Yes, please.
Emeka.
Please forward those on. We'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you again for having me today.